Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. Currently we're in Joshua chapter 10. And we left off with this great victory that God had given Joshua and the children of Israel against these 5 kings. That actually started with the Gibeonites, who deceived Joshua and them and made a treaty. And this is one of the things where you could say right reasons, wrong methods. In other words, they knew that they were going to be conquered. They had come to know that the God of the Israelites was going to conquer them. And in a sense, this was their way of kind of submitting to the God of the Israelites. But they just did it in the wrong way. They lied about it. They deceived the Israelites. Joshua's mistake was not seeking the Lord, asking him about these people. They just believed their testimony. They were actually neighbors when they told them they were coming from afar. Traveling from a far distance. So they made a treaty with them, and therefore they had to honor it. So meanwhile, these 5 kings said that, hey, we need to do something about Israel. They're starting to really defeat everyone. So they came together. And they started to punish the Gibeonites for making a treaty with them. And they decided they were going to attack the Gibeonites. And hey, guess what? We got a treaty with Joshua and them. And Joshua and them, they show up. And they actually defeat them. But let's go to it. But it was an astounding defeat because, one, you had these tremendous hailstones that actually was rained down and actually killed most of these kings, the Amorite kings. And in doing so, also, Joshua called for the sun to stand still. He said the orbit of the earth stopped. Now think about it. The orbit of the earth stopped for a day. One other thing before I move on is that in verse 13, he says right here, isn't this written in the book of Jashar? What's interesting about this, and again I want to talk about this, I'm not going to spend too much time because I'll eat up my time here, but I think it is important because we don't have the book of Jasar, however you want to pronounce it. This tells us that there could be a lot of writings out here, and we're going to see that there are books that we just don't have. They haven't been discovered. It's possible that these books can be discovered, and you have all these kind of stories that are in them. And I'm going to say that when people claim to have these stories, there is a test that the scholars will use to determine if they are inspired writings. Okay. All right. I want to move on. Let me read verse 12. On that day, the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel. Joshua spoke to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and the moon over the valley of Ajalon, and the sun stood still and the moon stopped. So of course, remember, at this time they probably didn't have the kind of knowledge we have. We know the orbit just stopped. It is written in the book of Jadar. So the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed its setting almost a full day. There has been no day like it before or since when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, because the Lord fought for Israel. Then the Joshua and the Israelites with him returned to the camp of Gilgad. Verse 16. Now the 5 defeated kings had fled and hidden themselves in the cave at Makkedah. It was reported to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found there hiding in the cave at Makkedah. Joshua said, roll a large stone against the mouth of the cave, and station men by it to guard the kings. But as for the rest of you, don't stay there. Pursue your enemies and attack them from behind. Don't let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has handed them over to you. So Joshua and the Israelites finished inflicting a terrible slaughter on them until they were destroyed, although a few survivors ran away to the fortified cities. The people returned safely to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah, and no one dared to threaten the Israelites. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the caves and bring those 5 kings out of there. That is what they did. They brought the 5 kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jermoth, Lachish, and Eglon to Joshua out of the cave. When they had brought the kings to him, Joshua summoned all of the men of Israel and said to the military commanders who had accompanied him, come out here and put your feet in the neck of these kings. So the commanders came forward and put their feet on their neck. And Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or discouraged. Be strong in the courage, for the Lord will do all this to the enemies you fight. After this, Joshua struck them down, executed them, hung their bodies on 5 trees, and they were there until evening. And at sunset, Joshua commanded that they be taken down from the trees and thrown into the cave where they are hidden. Then a large stone was placed against the mouth of the cave, and the stones are there unto this day. And on that day Joshua captured Makkedah and struck it down with the sword, including its king. He completely destroyed it and everyone in it, leaving no survivors. So he treated the kings of Makkedah as he had the kings of Jericho. Joshua and all of Israel with him crossed from Makkedah to Libnah and fought against Libnah. The Lord also handed it and its king over to Israel. He struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword, and left no survivors in it. He treated Libnah king as he had done the king of Jericho. From Libnah, Joshua and all of Israel with him crossed to Lachish. They laid siege to it and attacked it, and the Lord handed Lachish over to Israel, and Joshua captured it on the 2nd day, struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. And at that time, Homer, king of Gezer, went to help Lachish, but Joshua struck him down along with his people, leaving no survivors in it. Then Joshua crossed Lachish to Eglon and all of Israel with him. They laid siege to it and attacked it. On that day they captured it and struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword. He completely destroyed it, and that day, just as he had done to Lachish. Next, Joshua and all of Israel went to Eglon from Hebron and attacked it. They captured it and struck it down, its kings, all its villages, and everyone in it with the sword. He left no survivors, just as he had done to Eglon. He completely destroyed Hebron and everyone in it. Finally, Joshua turned towards Debir, and attacked it, all of Israel with him. He captured it, its king, and all of its villages. They struck them down with the sword and completely destroyed everyone in it, leaving no survivors. He treated Debir and its king as he had treated Hebron, and as he had treated Libnah and its king. So Joshua conquered the whole region, the hill country of Negev, and the Judean foothills, and the slopes with all their kings, leaving no survivors. He completely destroyed every living being, as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. And Joshua conquered everyone from Kadesh Barnea to Gezer. and all of the land of Goshen, as far as Gibeon. And Joshua captured all these kings and their lands in one campaign, because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all of Israel to the camp of Gilead. So, just one campaign, he destroyed all of these kings. Excuse me. Now, I want you to file this in your mind when we say the Lord God fought for Israel. We're going to see that later on in the prophecies. All right. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, when the king of Hazor heard the news, he sent a message to Jobab, king of Maidan, and the king of Shiram, and Ashphot, and the king of the North Hill country, and the Arabah, south of Shinithabith, in the Judean foothills. Again, forgive my pronunciation because I know I'm butchering these pronunciations for these names. It says that, and the slopes of Dor to the west, and the Canaanites to the east to the west, the Amorites, Hittites, and Perizzites, the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites at the foot of Himon in the land of Mizpah. They went out with their armies, a multitude as numerous as the sand on the seashore, all with a vast number of horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces. They came together and camped at the waters of Merom and attacked Israel. The Lord said to Israel, do not be afraid of them, for at this time tomorrow I will cause all of them to be killed before Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn up their chariots. So Joshua and the whole military forces surprised them at the waters of Merom and attacked them. The Lord handed them over to Israel, and they struck them down, pursuing them as far as the great Sidon and the Mizrapah, Main, and to the east as far as the valley of Mizpher. They struck them down, leaving no survivors. Joshua treated them as the Lord had told them. He hamstringed their horses and burnt up their chariots. At that time, Joshua turned back, captured Hazor, and struck down his king with the sword, because Hazor had formerly been their leader in all these kings. They struck down everyone in it with the sword, completely destroying them. He left no one alive. Then he burned down Hazor. Joshua captured all these kings and their cities and struck them down with the sword. He completely destroyed them as Moses, the Lord's servant, had commanded. However, Israel did not burn any of the cities that stood on their mounds except Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites plundered all the spoil, the cattle of these cities for themselves, but they struck down every person with the sword until they had annihilated them, leaving no one alive, just as the Lord had commanded his servant Moses. Moses commanded Joshua. That is what Joshua did, leaving nothing undone, all that the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, let me remind you that it seems harsh, but a lot of these people were very wicked, cruel, and very exceedingly sinful. So that's why, again, what God told them, do not be bothered that this great slaughter is happening, even of women and children. And it's probably the biggest thing that people have the most problem with. Verse 16. So Joshua took all of this land, the hill country of Negev, all the land of Goshen, the foothills, the Arabah, and the hill country of the Israelites with its foothills, from Mount Helak, which ascends to Seir, as far as Baal-Gad, and in the valley of Lebanon, and the foot of the Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down, putting them to death. Joshua waged war with all of these kings for a long time. No city made peace with the Israelites except the Hivites who inhabited Gibeon. All of them were taken in battle. For it was the Lord's intention to harden their hearts so that they would engage Israel in battle, be completely destroyed without mercy. and annihilate, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So again, right there, he tells us why he is doing this. I'm not going to get into the statement. It does at this point, but notice he does say, verse 20, for it was the Lord's intention to harden their hearts so that they would engage Israel in battle and be completely destroyed without mercy. Well, we'll come back to that and deal with that at another time. We have dealt with kind of that statement, but we'll deal with it another time. Verse 21, at that time, Joshua proceeded. You know what? I'll make this one statement when it talks about God hardening their hearts. So when we have a statement like this, and again, there are those who, let's say a Calvinist might take this and go, see, this shows that God's sovereignty rules and all that. No one's disputing the sovereignty of God here. However, when you see a statement like this, keep this in mind, that Joshua was criticized for not checking out the Gibeonites, who they made a treaty with. In other words, remember, God instructed Moses to annihilate everyone once they crossed the Jordan. Everyone in the land of Israel, the boundaries that God had laid out, he said, everyone was to be destroyed. So my point is that when you see a statement like this, that God hardened their hearts, yes, no one is disputing the sovereignty of God. However, understand as well that man does have free will that God had given him. Okay. All right. So verse 21 again. At that time, Joshua proceeded to exterminate the Anakim from the hill country, Hebron, Debri, Anab, all the hill country from Judah and Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them with their cities. No Anakim were left in the land. Now, Anakim, these were like tall people, giants. No Anakim was left in the land except the Israelites, except some remaining in Gaza, Gath, and Asher. Now we're going to come, of course, to know Gath, the Philistine giant. Verse 23. So Joshua took the entire land in keeping with all the Lord had told Moses. Joshua then gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. After this, the land had rest from war. We will get more into that in these upcoming chapters. 12 verse 1 says, the Israelites struck down the following kings of the land and took possession of the land beyond the Jordan. This is kind of a going over what Moses had done. What Joshua had done. Actually, Israel, you can talk about kind of like Israel. This is kind of the conquering, the land in the territories that Israel took over, conquered, and now they're possessing. Verse 1 again, it says, the Israelites struck down the following kings of the land and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan, the east, and from the Arnon Valley to Mount Hernon, including the Arabah eastwards. Sihon, king of the Amorites, lived in Heshbon. He ruled over the territory from Arah, from the rim of Anar Valley belonged to the middle of the valley, half of Gilead, up to Jabbok, the Jabbok River, the borders of the Amorites, the Arabah east of the Sea of Shinarith, the Sea of the Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, eastward through Beth Jesmoth, southward, just below the sleeve. Og, the king of Bashan, in the remnant of Rephaim, lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. He ruled over Mount Heman, Selikah, and all Bashan up to Gishran and the Machonah border, and half of Gilead and the borders of Sihon, king of Heshbon. Moses, the Lord's servant, and the Israelites struck them down, and Moses and the Lord's servant gave them Gilead land as an inheritance to the Reubenites, Gadonites, and a half a tribe of Manasseh. Now we will talk about, well, what the writer is doing is giving us then some of that conquered territory that's already been parceled out, okay, to Reubenites, Gadites, and the half the tribe of Manasseh. And it says Joshua and the Israelites struck down the following kings and lands beyond the Jordan to the west, from Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon to Mount Hilak, which ascends towards Seir. Joshua gave their land as inheritance to the tribe of Israel according to the allotment: the hill country, including the foothills, the Arab, the slopes, the desert, and the Negev of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hittites, and Jebusites. The king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai, which is next to Beth, 1. King of Jerusalem, 1. King of Hebron, 1. The king of Judah. Now all these are the kings are one, as you can see here, and so these are all of the kings that he has conquered: the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lashan, the king of Eglon, the king of Gershon, the king of Debir, king of Jeter, the king of Horman, the king of Arad, the king of Libnah, the king of Abdullah, the king of Makeda, the king of Bethel, the king of Tepel, the king of Hapa, Aphek, Lishan, Madon, Hazon, the king of Shiran, Miran, the king of Ashba, the king of Teak, the king of Megiddo. Now, by the way, look at some of these names too. Megiddo, that we will see later in prophecy. The king of Kadesh, the king of Jeremiah, Kemal, the king of Dura, Nephador, the king of Goim and Gilag, the king of Tia. The total number of kings, 31 kings. Okay. Again, my apologies for butchering the pronouncing of those names. And then when we get into the other chapters, it's going to be the dividing of these lands, of these kings, in the next study, or as we steam towards the end of Joshua. All right, see you in the next study.